Purdue has ascended to the mountaintop of both the Locked On and AP College Basketball Top 25, and we all agree with that, right?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We are your hosts. That's Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade. We're so glad to be with you. Less than a week from Christmas, Andy. That does not feel real. Hey, folks, if you're trying to get away from your family, speaking of Christmas, and you want to talk some more college basketball, come join the Locked On College Basketball Discord. The link for that is in the show notes. We would love to have you. We're talking college basketball all day long on there, especially you everydayers. If you're not part of this already, you're missing out on it. Andy, it is Tuesday, and that means Trivia Tuesday. This week, I am asking you, if you're new to the show, each Tuesday we have a trivia question we ask off the top, and then I'll give Andy a chance to answer it later on in the show and then tell him how badly and poorly he did. Speaking of badly and poorly, Andy, I, before the show, went with my family to the gym. Great decision. Immediately from there, we went to eat supper. Andy, we ran for the border at Taco Bell. That was a less awesome decision.
Well, no, better decision.
I honestly, I feel like the worst person in the world right now. So that said, Trivia Tuesday, here we go. This is from John Gassaway from ESPN. Actually, a stat he kind of happened on a couple years ago and just keeps refreshing it. And it says this: the last 19 national champions have all been ranked in the top 12 in that season's Week 6 AP poll. I know that's a lot of logistics. Top 12 of the Week 6 AP poll. So last week was the Week 6 AP poll for this season. So, Andy, the question is this: who were last week's top 12 AP teams that, if the trend holds, the national champion is going to come from one of those 12 teams, and bonus points if you get any of those teams in their right slot? So, Andy, start thinking on last week's top 12. We'll come back around to it in just a little bit. Where we want to start today, folks, we got a great show coming up for you. We're going to look at both our poll and the AP poll, see where some differences are. We want to preview a couple great games that are coming up tonight, including a ranked matchup, which you wouldn't expect the Tuesday before Christmas. But Andy, we want to start at the top end of the poll. When we were talking last week, we had a top 8 that we felt really good about. But since then, 2 of those 8, in fact, it was teams 7 and 8, if I remember correctly, or 6 and 8, have dropped a little bit in both our poll and the AP poll. And that is Creighton, who lost at UNLV, and then Baylor, who lost, quote unquote, at Michigan State on Saturday. It was in Detroit. So, Andy, here's my question to kick us off. Do we still consider those 2 teams as part of this elite top 8? And while you answer it, for those of you watching, I'm actually going to pull up our Locked On Top 25 poll for this week. Andy, take it away.
Yeah, first of all, the Creighton game was also, quote unquote, at UNLV. Yeah. Technically, that game was in Henderson, Nevada. Regardless, 2 base pseudo road games for Creighton and Baylor. I would still consider them 2 of the top 10 teams in the country. I didn't knock Creighton at all in my rankings. I think I still had them 8 even after the loss to UNLV because they turned around and beat Alabama. And yeah, Alabama is a inconsistent team, certainly a team that struggles defensively and probably a pretty good matchup for Creighton just in terms of their offensive abilities. But I'm pretty high on Creighton still. I remain high on Creighton. I am a little concerned about the fact that they've had 2 offensive stinkers. Granted, they were against Colorado State and UNLV. Colorado State, a top 25 team. UNLV, a very good team, and that was a pseudo road environment for Creighton. But I haven't really knocked them too much, but I am concerned about the consistency. We were talking before we hit record here, and like Colorado State's the kind of team that you would face if you were a 3 seed and they were a 6 seed. Like you'd face that team in the second round. And UNLV is the kind of team that could be a play in 11 that ends up being a team you face in the second round. So Creighton's lost to 2 teams that might not even make them into the Sweet 16 if they were to lose those teams in the tournament. So that's something that's kind of rattling around in my brain. And Baylor they just had a horrific half of basketball. They have played really well outside of the first half against Michigan State, but they played terrible 17 points against Michigan State. We're going to talk more about what that game meant for Michigan State. And I think a lot of the conversation around that game has been like, okay, Tom Izzo's team, are they back? Have they found their way after a slow start to the season? And there hasn't been as much conversation about that game from the Baylor side. And I wonder if that's people who are just like, hey, maybe we just tossed that out. They kind of rebounded in the second half. But at the same time, Michigan State let off the gas in a significant way in the second half too. So I'm kind of playing a wait and see game with Baylor. I dropped them obviously in the poll. I don't know how you can't not drop Baylor for losing an unranked team and getting beat very badly by an unranked team, even if Michigan State is a unique unranked team in the sense that they were a preseason top 5 team. So I still believe in both these teams, but I do think that the list of kind of that really ironclad top group of teams has shrunk a little bit. Like, I'm not sure either of these teams, now that Creighton has 2 losses, now that Baylor has really showed a significant, has had a really bad performance on their resume, which they didn't have before. I'm more skeptical about both teams. I don't know how anybody couldn't be, but I still have them as teams that I think are dangerous Sweet 16, Elite 8 threats and could be teams that are in that Final Four conversation. They just certainly don't quite look as strong as we saw from them previously.
Yeah, for those of you watching, in our poll, Creighton dropped to 10, Baylor to 15. In the AP poll, Baylor's 10 and Creighton is 12. Andy, looking back at my own rankings, I think I was probably a little too harsh on both of these teams. I actually dropped Creighton to 14 and Baylor to 17. I just basically gave Baylor an automatic 10-spot drop and then just said, fight your way back up, which I think they will do.
Yeah.
But with Baylor, it's weird because the defense is ranked real low at KenPom. With Creighton, you and I were talking about this. It's like, as good and as potent as their offense should be, it's kind of been an offensive issue when they've struggled. And so we'll wait to see with both of those. But like you said, I believe that these are both ultimately still top 10 teams that are going to be probably 3 seeds or better, I would say, if I was seeding this right now. But what you said, I think, is a great point. Also, that moves us into the next part of this conversation, because you said that ironclad tip top of the sport now has probably shrunk a little bit. And so, Andy, with that said, it feels like this top 5 is pretty locked in. By our poll, it's Purdue 1, UConn 2, Arizona 3, Kansas 4, Houston 5. The AP poll, slightly different. Purdue 1, Kansas 2, Houston 3, Arizona 4, UConn 5. And Andy, I think that's, and we'll get to Marquette folks here in just a second, but I think that is the right shrinking of these teams. I think both the AP voters, and I think we got this right with Purdue, they hands down have the best resume right now. I just don't think you can make an argument. Obviously we're nitpicking right now at the tip top, but when you pick those nits, Purdue has the most of them. I don't even know if that's the right way to use that phrase, but that's just what's true right now. And so, more so outside of that, the conversation is about how you nitpick 2 through 5. And so, Andy, so you went UConn, Arizona, Houston, Kansas 2 through 5. And then the only difference that I had was I just flip-flopped Kansas and Houston. I had Kansas 4, Houston 5. Why do you have 2 through 5 the way you do?
Yeah, I think UConn just looks like, that's a pure eye test perspective. They look like the second or best team in college basketball. Them and Purdue are right there. Arizona is right there too. I think those top 3 are really, really solid teams. Obviously, Purdue's going to move ahead of Arizona because in a head-to-head matchup, they won. And they won that game. And it was a really good, hotly contested game. There weren't really any caveats. Purdue just won. And so they get that top ranking. They have that loss to Northwestern on the road. The rest of their resume is really solid. Their quality of wins is really high. UConn and Arizona both have high quality wins as well. And neither of their losses are overly concerning. Arizona, of course, to Purdue. UConn's is to Kansas at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. And I just think, like, when you look at that combination of things, these 3 teams, Purdue technically has the worst loss, but they have the best overall resume. And I think for me, that it's really ironclad that those are the top three teams. I'm surprised that the AP voters disagreed and had UConn down at fifth. I was kind of surprised that UConn didn't move up after beating Gonzaga in a pseudo road environment in Seattle. I was in the house for that game. There was not a lot of UConn fans that were there, and that was a nice win for UConn. But the only difference I have with you is the Kansas and Houston. Kansas, I know they came back and won against Indiana, and that's a really nice win for them to win on the road in that environment. I'm still a little concerned about Kansas's depth. I'm concerned about their shooting guard position, not in an overly I'm really down on them way. I have them fifth in the country. Clearly, I believe in them. But for me, Houston's defense is so good. I know their resume is not as strong. I understand why they are fifth in a lot of other places. Because that they haven't beat a lot of really good teams, but that Texas A&M victory, A&M almost came back and beat them, but they didn't. And Houston has that win now over a quality team in the SEC. Xavier's a quality win for them too. So I really like Houston. Them and Kansas is really close for me, but to me, this top five, especially 2 through 5, could be ordered almost any different way, and I think it's defensible.
Yeah, for me, that slight swap that you and I have is about two things. Number one, it is the quality of schedule and wins that Kansas had. I know that Kansas has a loss and Houston doesn't, but Houston hasn't played Marquette, and that's who Kansas has lost to. But Kansas has beaten Kentucky, who's now a top 10 team. Kansas has beaten UConn, who you and I both have number 2. And then also, you hate that these factors come in, Andy, but the Terrence Arsenault factor for me. Sure. I'm really curious. And again, you hate to make that a factor, but it is. And so I'm curious to see what Houston will be as they move forward. And then I want to see them against not just high level, but elite level competition, which they're going to get very often in the Big 12. And so there's that.
Yeah, I think the last thing that I kind of wanted to touch on really quickly is just the Marquette of it all. Marquette is 6th. They kind of fit right in that kind of just outside the top 5 conversation. And I feel like if there is going to be any change to the top 5, I think the top 5 is probably going to stay pretty consistent throughout the rest of the season. But Marquette feels like a team that might sneak in there. We're going to preview their game against Providence here later in the show, but Marquette feels like a team that's kind of knocking right on the door of being a top 5 team. And then kind of after that, the whole rest of, the teams outside of that, you have Oklahoma, you have Tennessee, you have Gonzaga kind of was in that conversation, North Carolina, Kentucky. There's a lot of teams that have been in that 7 to 15 range throughout the year and nobody that's really consistently stuck. And it feels like there's a top 5 that's consistent, Marquette, and then it gets kind of wonky after that. And I'm curious how long it will continue to look like that, because that's kind of been the rhythm of the AP poll and our poll for the last month or so.
Yeah, it really feels like Marquette could hang around and sneak into that top 5 here and there. But I do think I'm with you. I think they're in a tier just ever so slightly below that top 5. But I see more separation from them down to 7 than I do from them up to 5. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yep. I think exactly. I think that's why they're kind of on an island in a sense.
That's good.
Well, Isaac, Michigan State, did they deserve to be ranked after that massive win over Baylor? We talked about it a bit already, but we're going to get more into that. And how on earth did the AP voters give more votes to Miami than they did to Auburn? We're going to discuss that craziness after a word from today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Folks, passion, drive, and patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, Isaac, continuing our conversation, comparing our poll to the AP poll and kind of what the differences were as we head into this next week of the college basketball season, the last week before we get to that Christmas break. And Isaac, 24 of the 25 teams on our poll were the exact same teams that were on the AP poll. Only one difference. Obviously, lots of different spots were different, but the fact that there was only one team difference is pretty wild to me. The difference is the AP poll had the Longhorns of Texas at number 19. We did not have them ranked on our college basketball poll. I think I was the only one who gave them a vote this week for our poll. And then Auburn was ranked on our poll at 19th. I think we all voted for Auburn, if I'm not mistaken.
I'll look while you're talking. Yeah.
And meanwhile, the AP voters somehow, when we will get to it, did not pick Auburn. I don't know how you look at the resume.
We all had them 18th. I had them 23rd. Leaf had them 17th.
Yeah, I we'll get to it. But I'm a little mystified why the AP voters didn't see a resume worth including in the top 25 for Auburn. But again, Texas for the AP polls, Auburn for us. And then there was a couple of teams where we were 5 or more spots different than the AP poll. We mentioned one of them is Baylor. The AP poll had them at 10. We had them at 15. Clemson, our poll had them at 13. The AP was down on them at 18. James Madison, the AP had them up at 20. We had them 25th. And then Memphis, we had at 18, and the AP poll had them at 23. Isaac, anything out of that group that kind of stands out to you as particularly notable or interesting in terms of the differences in our poll and the AP poll?
The first thing I thought was hilarious, Andy, is that not only did we have just one team different, it's that it was in the same slot. Because it wasn't just like 23 and 25. It was all the way up into the top. It was 19 for 19. And so that's interesting. On the Texas of it, we'll get more to that, but I think Dylan Dessou being back matters in that conversation. So let me give you some flowers for your Texas vote, and we'll see how they continue to do. I think just getting that depth is big. The one that sticks out to me, interestingly, like not James Madison, because I get that people are going to feel so wildly different about them. I kind of have gone back and forth between both Clemson and Memphis. It feels like because Clemson, it's almost like a reputational 18 for them in the AP poll. And I think that the three of us are more looking at Clemson's actual resume and what they're doing. We were very aligned. You voted Clemson 12. I was 15, the lowest, and Leaf had them 14th. And so for me, when you start thinking about Clemson's resume and what they've done, I mean, yes, they just lost at Memphis, but it's a true road game at the FedEx Forum, a game that they only lost by 2 points, and then they've won every other opportunity they've had. They have beaten Bama in a true road game. They beat Pittsburgh in a true road game. I mean, it's just they've been tested. They've shown up. They've got the personnel that I believe in. So for me, I believe in where we have Clemson. Like if we have a team wrong, I don't ever mind coming back and saying it.
Sure.
But in this one, I think we're right and the AP's too low.
What stands out to me, and I know that this is not a hard and fast science by any stretch, but there was 2 teams that dropped by 5 and 1 team that dropped by 4 in the AP poll. Clemson drops by 5 for losing a true road game to a ranked team in Memphis. Gonzaga drops by 5 for losing a pseudo home game against one of the 3 best teams in the country in UConn. And then Baylor drops by 4 despite getting obliterated by an unranked team. And I'm not advocating that Baylor should have dropped way more necessarily, but it is odd that Clemson took a bigger fall in the AP poll for losing a true road game to a ranked team by 2,
yes,
compared to Baylor losing a pseudo road game to an unranked team by 150 or whatever the final score was of that game. That is just and I think you nailed it with the reputation thing. Baylor still has a reputation, and Baylor may still be a better team than Clemson. We have them higher. The AP still has them higher. I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but it is odd that is how the breakdown went in terms of how far those 2 teams, and Gonzaga tossed in there as well, how far those teams fell.
Whew. Well, and Andy, the other one for me, and I know we got to keep going, so I won't belabor it. It is Memphis. Like it's funny that we're talking about them with Clemson there, but we have them a good bit higher, and I think they should be. But we need to get to Michigan State, this team that is the one that beat that Baylor team we were just talking about. Because I think one of the questions is, people are like, do we bump them back into the poll? What does that look like? Well, they show up 33rd in the AP poll this week, so others receiving votes. They followed it. A big question is, we asked this on Monday's show, like, is this a one-off or where are they at? Well, they played Oakland on Monday night, who's, not a phenomenal team, but they're one of the 5 teams at KenPom that has risen the most since opening day. They beat Michigan State, wins that game by 17. Yeah. And so, it's like, okay, you did that. Let's we need more data points on this. But Andy, for you, how did you think seriously at all about having Michigan State back in your top 25?
Yeah, I ranked them. I did. Yeah. I had them 24th, and I think it's probably a situation where you should take more time. Like, let's see if this is actually the rebound for Tom Izzo's team. Maybe I jumped the gun a tiny bit on having them ranked, but I think that it's a really quality roster. It's a really quality team. It's a really well coached team, and they have had a bad start to the season. There's no debating that. There's no denying that. There's no, pretending that that's not what happened. But we knew that this team was capable of having these really balanced scoring attacks. We knew this team was capable of shooting better than we saw early in the season. And we're starting to see that. They made 9 threes against Oakland. They shot well against Baylor. And yeah, maybe if they drop another game in the Big Ten in the next week or so, this will look more like an aberration. And maybe, again, we jump in the gun by ranking them now. But we know the talent of a top 25 team is there, a top 15 team, arguably from a talent perspective, top 10 team, top 5 team from a coaching perspective. It's all there, and it's starting to look like it might be getting unlocked.
Well, and guess what, Andy? I know that this team is now 6-5 after that win. All 5 of those losses, you hate to have that many losses. They're all quad 1. Yeah. They're all quad 1 losses. I like James Madison. Yes. They're a ranked team. They lost to Duke, lost to Arizona, lost to Wisconsin and Nebraska. And it's like, folks, Nebraska is legitimately a good basketball team. So, while they shouldn't lose all those, they're definitely explainable.
So I know we're running low on time, Isaac, but will you allow me to jump on my soapbox real quick?
I love a good soapbox, and I wish I could place it for you that you might step upon it.
The 26th team in the AP poll is Miami. They were the team that had the most votes that did not make the top 25. 27th is Auburn. We already discussed how we had Auburn 19th in our poll. And I'm not trying to trash on Miami here, but I don't see any argument why you would vote for Miami over Auburn. I do not see it. The Appalachian State loss is very clearly what is dragging Auburn's resume down. And I think that a lot of people are not aware that App State is a pretty good basketball team, and B, this was a true road game for the Tigers. A true road loss against the 78th team at KenPom. That is not a terrible loss. Both teams are 8-2. Auburn has better wins, and their wins haven't even been close. So first of all, Auburn's only their losses to Baylor in the first game of the season. So they have a loss to Baylor, they have a loss to App State, and then they have blown everybody else out. Closest win is 15 points over Southeast Louisiana. Beat USC by 16, St. Bonaventure by 17, Virginia Tech by 18, Notre Dame by 24, Indiana by 28. They are blasting teams. Miami, on the other hand, they're also 8-2. Their losses are better in theory. They're against Kentucky and Colorado, better teams, but they got spanked by both those teams. They got beat by 27 points to a now unranked Colorado team. They got beat by 18 to Kentucky. And their wins, they got a 6-point win over FIU. They got a 7-point win over LaSalle. I don't think this Miami team is better than Auburn. KenPom doesn't even think they're close. KenPom has Auburn at 8, which definitely feels high, but when you blow teams out, that's what happens. And they have Miami at 59. I don't see the argument. I get why people might like Miami. I get why they're a borderline top 25 team, but they are not better than Auburn, and I don't see the argument here.
No, I mean, and what is the best win? K-State? Is that what we would say their best win?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Which isn't bad, but after that, it drops off. Well, Andy, while Tuesday night's action is not completely electric for the week before Christmas, it ain't a bad slate of games. We want to get to 3 of them in particular, including a ranked Virginia at Memphis. Another true. How does Memphis keep landing these great home games, Andy? I don't know, but we're going to talk about it in just a second. All right, Tuesday night, 6 days away from Christmas Day. Andy, the goose is getting fat. There's a song about it, and I love it, and I'm hungry. Although I'm not that hungry because that Taco Bell conversation. Virginia, 23rd at our poll, 22nd in the AP. At number 18 in our poll, 23 in the AP. Memphis, 7 tonight on ESPN2. We have a FanDuel line, Andy, and it's the Tigers by 2.5 points. So Virginia comes in riding a 5-game winning streak, but Andy, they did not look good Saturday against Northeastern. I caught some of that game, and it was just like, hey, but hey, a W is a W, and we'll give it to them. Only losses to Wisconsin right now. Again, a totally understandable loss. Andy, this Memphis team feels like it is rolling right now, and after what they did to Clemson in the FedEx Forum on Saturday, I think it might be back-to-back 2-0 against the ACC. What about you?
Yeah, I'm taking Memphis in this one. I really like that. I think the matchup is good for the Tigers. I am really curious how Ryan Dunn, who's just been absolutely fantastic for Virginia, particularly on the defensive end of the floor. He's the best defender in college basketball, and I'm not sure that it's close, to be honest. He's 2.5 blocks, 2.3 steals per game, and that's in 26 minutes. He's unbelievable at forcing turnovers. I'm curious how he gets deployed, who he ends up guarding for Memphis, whether he matches up with David Jones or how they kind of figure that out, because David Jones has been an absolute star for Memphis this season. But I really like this matchup. I think it's going to be a fun battle of if Virginia can really slow down the Tigers, especially on their home floor. But yeah, I think Memphis is going to get another win over the ACC and perhaps make our ranking of them, which was much higher than the AP poll, look pretty good.
Yes, sir. You know, and as a reminder, they do not yet have Naquan Tomlin, but man, once they add him in the front court there, Penny's team assumedly is going to get that much better. Andy, let's stay in that 7:00 Eastern time slot. The first game of the Jumpman Invitational. The second game will be Wednesday night, but this one is in Charlotte. It's Florida and Michigan. ESPN, FanDuel has the line. Gators minus 2.5. Andy, what do you think about this one?
Really, really good even matchup. KenPom has Florida at 38 and Michigan at 45. It'll be Juwan Howard's first time back coaching against a Power 6 opponent. I'm curious to see what that does for the Wolverines. And these are two teams that really need a win. They're only 6-5. They got a win at St. John's. They beat Stanford. They got a win in Iowa. None of those are particularly great wins. The Long Beach State loss certainly stands out. The rest of their losses aren't anything too terrible, but this is a team that really needs a win. And Florida's kind of in a similar boat. They're 7-3, so they're in a better spot, but their best wins are Florida State and Pitt. Yeah. Just nothing all that great. The Wake Forest loss definitely stands out for Florida, and certainly they want to avoid another loss to a team kind of in that similar-ish range, although Michigan's better than Wake Forest. So I do think Florida is going to win. I think they're really well coached. I think they're pretty balanced. I think that guard play we've seen from them, from Riley Kugel and Walter Clayton, has been good enough that I think they'll be able to win even against Doug McDaniel and the phenomenal play that he's had for the Wolverines. But I think this is going to be a really close and really, really fun game to kick off leading into that Oklahoma-North Carolina game on Wednesday.
Yes, agreed. That Walter Clayton take, Andy, it's staying hot. He's looking good. Okay, let's get to a Big East matchup. Marquette, 6th in both our poll and the AP poll, is at Providence, 8:30 Eastern on FS1. We don't have a FanDuel line yet, but the Marquette line, or the KenPom line, is Marquette by 5. Andy, Tyler Kolek heading home to the smallest state in our country. Should be a fun one, and you expect a lot of folks there cheering on the Marquette's point guard.
Yeah, it's a fun opportunity for Providence to potentially pick up another win over a ranked team from the state of Wisconsin, because they beat Wisconsin. Now they're getting a chance to play Marquette. Perhaps they'll be able to pull it off. I think Providence is a little bit under the radar this year. They're 9-2. Their only losses are to Kansas State and at Oklahoma. That Oklahoma loss has obviously aged well. That Kansas State loss, not so much. I think that's probably dragging their resume down. They also don't have any super marquee wins. And that's what they're hoping to change. They got the win over Wisconsin. That's a great win. If they beat Marquette, that's a huge win for them in conference play. And nobody wants to play at Providence. Kim English, very, very good coach. I think this is going to be a very close game. I certainly think Marquette is the better team, but the better team doesn't always win on the road in the Big East. In fact, it's really, really hard to win on the road in the Big East. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if Providence wins this one.
I wouldn't either, especially you're amped to go home if you're Tyler Kolek, but sometimes we see guys overdo it. And so I think he did Shaka just needs to temper him before the game, find a way to do that. I'm expecting a big Oso game, and so let's watch out and see what he does. Andy, fun slate. These 3 games should be good. There's always like a mystery game that pops up and catches our attention. But we got to get to our trivia question answer. Andy, who were last week's top 12 AP teams, one of whom who was going to clearly and definitively be this year's national champion? What do you got?
Well, Arizona.
Number 1, there you go.
Yeah, Kansas was 2, right? There's still 2. And then you got Purdue, Purdue, Houston, UConn.
5 for 5 in order so far, by the way.
Marquette? Or no, Baylor was 6.
Baylor was 6.
Baylor, Marquette. Creighton was top 12, I think.
They were 8. Yep.
Okay. Was North Carolina, were they top 12?
They were 9. Yep.
Yeah, okay, they were 9. Gonzaga was 10.
Yep.
Tennessee?
They were 12.
Oh.
So you're missing 11.
Is it 11?
It's a team we have talked about tonight that's playing a marquee game on Wednesday. In the Jumpman Invitational.
Oh, they're playing in Jumpman?
They're undefeated. Yes.
Oklahoma. Okay, Oklahoma.
There you go. Dude, I think you got 9 of the 12, not only right, but in their right spot or something like that. And you got 11 of the 12 in totality. Great job. That's a tough one. Andy Patton.
I would just say, too, I think we probably are going to have a national champion out of that group. That would be my take there. I think so.
100. We're going to be 20th national champion in a row holding that down. Sorry about you, Kentucky. You're in the top 10. But you clearly you don't have what it takes.
Weren't there by week 6. Sorry. Well, folks, that's going to do it for us today here on Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And, of course, to those of you who have joined us on our Discord channel. There is a link in the show notes for those of you who are interested in doing so. We're talking college hoops 24/7 there. We will be back later in the week recapping those games. We'll recap that Jumpman Invitational game between Florida and Michigan. And then, of course, get to the preview of that big one. It's Oklahoma and North Carolina. All that coming up here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Apologies to the Lawyer family. Go Wildcats. And until tomorrow, peace.